aren't. Okay. We keep the fond oath sworn 1,000 years ago. Using reincarnation as a plot device. At a personal level, I am a reincarnationist, and I've often used it in my work. I've used it in The Hollow Curse as a mode of basically time travel to track the origin of the curse that has been placed against the lovers through the lifetimes of its manifestation through to the present day. It's a recurring theme in my series, The Chronicles of Ray McAndrews, Nuki Kubai, and Revenant coming out later this year, where Ray is an occultist and he's always finding parallels to the case that he's currently working, cropping up from his past lives. And his long-term on-again, off-again girlfriend, Kathy, and he have been together in multiple incarnations, and it kind of leaks over and creates problems sometimes. In Dreaming the Goddess, I reference it. Dreaming the Goddess is an anthology, and it's all basically stories themed upon various aspects of goddess worship. And the title, we keep the fond oath sworn 1,000 years ago, is from one of the most beautiful poems I have ever read, A Spark in the Ashes by Charles Godfrey Leland. Just to give it some context. In the first line, I went to a gay reception last winter in the West. And it's all about meeting up in life after life. Now, why do it? Fictionally, it gives a really quick explanation for enmity or attraction with your characters. So you don't have to, beyond hinting that we knew each other in a previous life, you don't have to define all the reasons they either like or dislike each other. It's the old idea that you know your friends, you know a true friend better in the first 5 minutes you met them than you know anyone else. So it's kind of harkens back to that and allows you to have that backstory and give that emotional context without having to develop it in the book. So it's a good shortcut. It's also wonderful, and I do this a lot in The Hollow Curse. You can flash to other times and follow recurrent themes without having to have a time machine, without having to have them read a book or use any of the other myriad devices you can do for that. It's a good dramatic device for just being able to bop around in time and, as I said, show recurrent themes. In The Hollow Curse, they're soulmates cursed to be forever separated by a gulf of years and social norms. So older man, younger woman, younger man, older woman. I have one where he is a maverick doctor in the Old West, Colorado territories, and she is an emancipated slave who left the South with her family. She's much younger than he is, but it's also the whole Caucasian black thing, and the bigotry of that time is the social norms that they are fighting against. And the message of the book overall is that if you love somebody, just love somebody, because the rest of it really will work itself out. Able to do stories within the story to emphasize or illustrate. So in the past lives, you see how the vengeance of the person who initiated the curse, who I define as D because all the names start with D for this character. You can see how their malice grows and how it manifests and how they keep repeating the same cycles. In other cases, you can use it as a source of information, as a school of archaeology that is past life archaeology. And Seti, who was a rather fascinating Egyptologist and something of an eccentric, was invaluable to certain archaeological digs because, according to her, she had lived a past life in that area and been a priestess of the temple that they were excavating. And it was uncanny how often she led the dig to specific areas and said, here you should find, and they found. So this can be applied dramatically as questing inward to try to find information for whatever purposes, how to defuse an ancient trap, where an ancient trap might be, that sort of thing. It's a useful writing trick. Adds conflict. Okay, this has gone on for centuries. We've been spitting in each other's eyes for 5,000 years. Why should we stop now? Explains motivation, as I got into earlier. Ups the stakes. Now, this is an important one. If it's a major factor in the book, are the conflicts that you're trying to deal with just going to repeat in the next life? Is that the implication that you're going to take to it? And then you start asking, if you go marching back, you can show those same patterns of conflict repeating time and time and time. And you can leave your audience with the thing of, you idiot, why are you doing this again? But your audience also has compassion because this is a different life. And while the spirit is connected, the memories aren't there, so they don't know they're doing it again. And so there's a little bit of this thing of your audience becomes the one who knows, looking on the poor deluded character. And that can be played with quite effectively. And I did that a lot in The Hollow Curse. There are problems with it, though. Like any form of historical literature, you want to have historical accuracy. Now, I'm not one to say that you have to be absolutely accurate and you know how many monks lived in the monastery and so forth. It's nice if you want to do that level of research. And for some forms of historical fiction, yes, you do need to do that. But for this, I think a little broader, what's the tech level capable of? For time periods, are they using saddles on horses yet? Do they have Damascus steel? Are they still using iron? Are they Bronze Age? Basically, the basic society around the time period that you are depicting in the past life. And you want to get the broad strokes of that right, or else it comes off as false. So it's not carte blanche for what I call Harry Potter wand-waving bullshit. You want to have some accuracy there to make it come alive and to give realistic conflicts. Also, you can have the complication of, which is fun to play with actually, because you have two souls in the previous life. One was the mother, the other was the daughter. In this life, the one that was the daughter is the father. The one that was the mother is the son. But the son is still trying to dominate the father because there's a carryover of that dynamic from the previous life. And, you know, both of them are thinking the other is kind of a spoiled child because they're looking at it from these different emotional perspectives. It allows you to carry over that sort of emotional context and to play with it. By the way, I'm very open to questions, interruptions, anything. This was supposed to be a panel, and it's become a seminar lecture thing. So, logical associations, and that's basically how likely is it that the lord of the manor would know some indistinct serf who lived on the outskirts of his territories. So if you want to have that, there needs to be some logical connection of why. There is a wonderful line in Red Dwarf where Rimmer, who is a reincarnationist, I don't know if you know the Red Dwarf television series. Okay. And he's saying, I was Alexander's the Great chief eunuch. And if you know Rimmer, you can believe it. But, you know, he's saying, this is why I've always been drawn to military men and wanting to be this heroic figure, which Rimmer is anything but. Until he becomes Ace Rimmer, who is a complete cliche and played for absolute humorous effect. I love Red Dwarf.
They're rebooting it with the original cast.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, which will be fun considering the original cast is now in their late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah, I saw the most recent episodes they did. And there was one season where they kind of lost their way, but then they got back to it and went, I'm really enjoying it. Watch for timeline issues. You don't want to have your person incarnated in two different places at the same time. It's easiest just to say, right, I'm going to leave about 100 years between incarnations. That way you don't end up tripping over each other, or they don't end up tripping over each other. If you want to do them closer, then you really have to think, okay, how did they die? When did they die? Which you can incorporate. You can do the thing of, yes, death, reincarnation, bang, and have the trauma of the death carry over to affect the behavior in the next incarnation. And that's another way of setting up conflict and issues for your character to deal with and to build the character. Also, there's character denial. A lot of folk don't believe in reincarnation. And that's perfectly fine. I mean, anything to do with past lives, I am firmly of the belief that the only scientific view is being agnostic. You know, I don't think atheism, given how much circumstantial evidence there is for something more, I don't think atheism is scientific. I also don't think that complete faith is scientific because the evidence is circumstantial. Given that, you have your own personal beliefs, I have my own personal beliefs, more power to it. That's just an aside. Now, some tips and tricks and tips. tips and tricks. Third day of a con. um, Avoid major historical figures unless you really, really, really want that as the thrust of what you're doing. If you want to do something autobiographical about Cleopatra, obviously, if you're using this as the technique for doing it, you're going to address her. But for every person of note in history, there are literally thousands of people whose major remembrance might be a baptismal record. And that's the only record that will exist. Or even less than that, especially when you go to the earlier time periods. You think, okay, the Battle of Troy. You literally had thousands of foot soldiers and townspeople at Troy. How many do we know from the Iliad and the Odyssey? You know, you can maybe pull out half a dozen, at most a dozen names from the surviving record of that time period. So you're far less likely to be Agamemnon than some poor guy who was dragged off his field, had a bronze sword thrust in his hand and said, go kill them over there. But that opens it up, because then you don't have to stick to a historical timeline for that particular individual. You just have to stick to the culture around them and the few luminary figures that they might actually come in contact with. And most people were nondescript background in their age. And, you're more likely to be digging a privy than you are to be collecting taxes. And you're far more likely to be collecting taxes than you are to be deciding military strategy. There's a group called the Society of Creative Anachronism that does this really well, because when you join, you take on the persona of somebody who may have lived in a historical period. So you'll give yourself a historically accurate name that can be documented, but it can't be anybody who was particularly famous or important. But you're all nobilities, so you're basically petty nobles that would have hung around the court and maybe had some lands that you looked after yourself. My name was Stephen Bruce in that group, and I took the first name of King Stephen because my name is Stephen Pearl, and my name is Stephen Bruce Vernon Pearl. So I just took my first name and then my middle name from Robert to Bruce, and used it as the last name for the character. And it's easy enough to do that, to get your character names if you want to go for a historical period. What I suggest is also, if you're going to do that, and I do suggest this for historical fiction as well, get a baby name book that lists the origin and stick to the names from that geographical region for its origin. And I've done this a lot. It's not a past life book, but in Horn of the Kraken, I have a whole lot of Norse characters. So I've used Norse names for them, which when they travel into the Anglo-Saxon territories, then I started incorporating Anglo-Saxon names for the individuals that they're interacting with. And it adds to the accuracy and the sense of it, because the names have a certain cadence. Go ahead.
Stephen, to what extent does the Domesday Book of England actually name people? I've seen bits of it, but I've never really seen specific.
I know it does have quite a lot of names in it, because it would be the name and then the list of the person's possessions.
That's right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's a good source for that let's see, it was late 1200s, wasn't it?
Just before, just after the Black Plague.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 12th century, I guess, rather than 13th. Well, the Black Plague kept coming back.
Yeah, the Black Death came back and back and back, and kind of kept that up until they realized it was the fleas on rats. You gotta love modern plumbing.
Yeah.
It's a good source. Another good source are the myths and legends. You look at even the modern name Thorson, son of Thor, and rather grandiose pedigree, but they were always claiming descent from some divinity or another, and so a lot of the modern names are carryovers from the ancient, and mythology is a good source. Tax rolls, if you want to get really pedantic about things, you get a lot from tax rolls, because one thing bureaucrats have always loved is to make sure that people pay their taxes. Reference appropriate time conflicts, and I have wash your hands, because one of the reasons my doctor in the Hollow Curse in the Old West section is in the Old West is he believed in the teachings of Dr. Lister, and he insisted on washing his hands before he did surgery. And he was a maverick, and they don't want that in a respectable hospital. And it is that was a legitimate conflict for that time period. It was just post-Civil War, and the idea of proper hygiene was still very much an issue in the medical profession. Earlier conflicts, you may talk about the Children's Crusade that just passed through in an earlier time period. Or, I'm seeing a blank face. You not heard of the Children's Crusade?
I have.
Oh, okay. There was it was a monk who thought it would be a great idea to recruit children and march them out to the Middle East, because by the time they reached there, they'd be old enough to fight. So he recruited a whole bunch of children, took them from their families, and marched them across Europe so that they could be sword fodder. And that's effectively what they were, because they weren't trained soldiers. They were completely outmatched. And he just thought it would be warm bodies to die for the church. Yeah, we're a lovely species. We're such a lovely species.
More and more, I think we're a chimera. Somebody needed a species that could move really quickly technologically, so they added some stuff to us. I just don't know why.
Yeah, that could be. We may have a big ship show up and say, "Hi, we bred you to be mercenaries. Get on." Don't clean up the past. These all apply to historical fiction as well, but I happen to have a fascination, and I don't know where it comes from, but a fascination with the treatment of sewage throughout the centuries. And it found its way into Horn of the Kraken. It also found its way into the Hollow Curse and most of my other historical works. And in Horn of the Kraken, I have one thing where one of the characters is crawling up through an old Roman sewer that had been refurbished because they rebuilt the Roman bath. And They talk about the wonderful plumbing of Rome. Well, what the Romans did was basically you had a board with holes cut in it over a trough, and you do your business into the trough. And then when it came time to flush the bath water, which was always filthy because it was communal baths and people would actually defecate in the water, they'd flush it into the trough, and once or twice a day, all that would be swept down and carried out into a river or something and just fall into it. And that was how Roman sewers worked and how the Roman toilets worked. And the tubs were basically, I used to work, well, I was a lifeguard at a YMCA that had a public hot tub, and human nature doesn't change. I'll just put it this way. I will not go into a public hot tub except to do an emergency rescue. I do not want to have that touch me, even with chlorine, and they didn't have chlorine. Race has nothing to do with reincarnation. And I think that's one of the greatest anti-racism arguments I can think of for any age, because could be you next time. So why be unpleasant this time? Obligations carry over from the past. The idea that, yes, if you're in debt, if you hold a debt, you will have a natural inclination. It's karma, natural inclination to want to rectify that. Now, this doesn't have to be included, but the concept of karma is something that is in most reincarnation structures. So it's a nice way of bringing in a conflict. You just feel, your character may just feel driven to help somebody with a sense that in a previous life, they had been helped and they want to even the scales. The Wiccans say that whatever you put into the life of another will be revisited 3 times over into your own. 3-fold good, 3-fold bad. That's their version of karma. And you can use that to sort of escalate tension in the book by having it arc over. And as I say, I'm not out to proselytize. This is how I've used it in books, how it can be used in books. Drawn from reality. These are my own experience with being a reincarnationist and doing past life regressions. Just to give it a sense of reality, if you want to write with it, if you want to play with those ideas. People tend to think that you get big chunks of memory. That's never been my experience. My experience is you get flashes, random images, and this is after a great deal of work to try to access it, even possibly short scenes. But from those scenes, you have to extrapolate the life around them. A good analogy would be somebody showing you a photograph and you having to make up a story going backwards and forwards on the timeline from that. That's how I find past life regressions have tended to work. And sometimes it won't be a photograph, sometimes it will be a 30-second or a 60-second film clip, but the same modality sort of applies. Because what carries over are the important things: loyalty, love, compassion, bravery, this sort of emotional gestalt that is the core nature of personality. Knowledge that goes in books and can be accessed in another life. Now, there is the concept of the Ascaic record, which is supposedly a record of everything that has ever happened. I look at that concept and I think, well, possibly you can quest back and forward along a timeline and see segments of it. But that's me as a true believer, and that's not necessarily going to be anybody else. As I said, birth personality. It's easy to draw false assumptions from the past. There's lots of people who think they were Napoleon. No, they were Napoleon's
Laundress.
Napoleon's servant. Yeah, one of his servants. But they lived in that area, so they have all sorts of fragments of knowledge about Napoleon. And because he's the name that they hear and it's ego-aggrandizing, they kind of fixate on him. And they start thinking, oh, yeah, I was. Now, admittedly, somebody had to have been Napoleon, but it's very unlikely that all the people who are walking around with their hand in the jacket are the individuals, depending on the theory of reincarnation you want to adhere to. Building stories on a glimpse. It can be very difficult to find records. And frankly, most people I know who use past life regression as a way of trying to deal with real life issues and see the roots of them, which is really its only valid thing to do with it. The rest is just ego. But if you understand that, yeah, the reason I'm prone to not putting out, well, the reason I'm have a little trepidation about having a large family is that in a previous life, I was a washerwoman who had 12 kids. So I've been there, done that, don't want to do it again. Yes, I just revealed one of the ones that I have a couple of fragments of. No, and for no read, there's no reason to find records for spiritual development. If you want to find records, there's no problem with that either. There's a few interesting techniques that might be used. They're all more or less bound with meditation, but going into a meditative state and visualizing yourself in a room with a table that has a long line of hats from all different time periods and nationalities. And then going to those hats and feeling which one feels right to you, putting it on your head and seeing what kind of impressions you get. Because that's more or less telling the subconscious that you want to have information coming from that time period, that incarnation. That's one of the simplest ones. But there are loads of books that give multiple modalities for accessing past lives. And if you want to add a little something that somebody's going to go, hey, yeah, I've read that, to your writing, which shows that you've done your homework, and I'm always in favor of people doing their homework, you can do that. And they're mostly, as I say, variations on past lives. You get some people who have taken brain trauma and will start to get flashes. That's a far rarer occurrence and totally not advisable to give yourself a concussion on the off chance you might remember something from the 1600s.
Start showing up as dream bits as you get older.
Dreams, especially when you meet people. You might meet somebody that you have an immediate sense about and dream that night about some fragment that they actually were part of in a previous life. And places can trigger it as well. It's wonderful to tour around historical sites and see what clicks, because some places still exist. I'm rather adverse to visiting dungeons, to be honest with you. Also, you can see it in natural aptitudes. Some skills that you are just inclined to be good at, you still have to train them, but you're good at them. I am, for a complete lack of practice in the last few years, quite good at swordplay. And it's just one of those natural aptitudes, and it ties back to a rather unpleasant individual during the Middle Ages. So you can look at your character's natural aptitudes and see how they could have come from something previous. If you want that to inform, if you want a previous life of your character to inform the present, take little more. Well, the other aspect of this is, in the Hollow Curse, I have part of my identifiers. I do several identifiers. An unrealistic one is all the spirits in continuity, the names start with the same letter. So I have Amanda, Ashley, Allison, all Andrew, all starting with the same letter. That is one of the ways I clue the reader into who's who, despite hopping through lives. The other thing is, you give them a mannerism. One of my characters always does this when they think, which is a mannerism a lot of people have. Frankly, it's been years since I wrote the book, so I'm trying to remember exactly what the mannerisms were, but they all have one that carries on. Lord Darius, who initiated the curse, was missing an eye. And the Diego, who is the villain in the Old West, has a lazy eye that shoots off to one side. And Dory, who is the current incarnation, has really bad eyesight and wears pop bottle glasses as correctional lenses. So I carry that through. It's a way of tipping off the reader and giving them continuity, because that's one problem you can run into with this, of trying to let them know who's who, because bodies are changing all the time. Each storyline, there's new bodies. You can also see it in some weird things that kids do. I remember what time as a child, they had a school play, and I tried to go backstage to speak to the actors to congratulate them on an excellent performance. And that comes from what I believe to be a previous incarnation, where I was a important man in the community and an aficionado of theater. And that was his practice, to go back and congratulate them. And it was just sort of carrying through. Weird things kids do, because they're closer to it than you are when you're an adult. It also, I think it instills a different attitude towards death than the one life and out belief systems. Because if you don't get it absolutely right, you're going to be able to fix it later. But it's also the thing of, everything comes back to roost because of karma. So there's this dual-edged sword of, yeah, I can fix it later, but I'm going to suffer more for it. And that's just a mentality thing. And you might want to incorporate that into your characters if they believe in reincarnation. And if they don't, that's fine too. This is all for fiction. I'm just using life experience to inform fiction. And well, any questions, any comments, thrown fruit, although that doesn't work well with the video seminar.
What you were talking about, people kind of staying together. Many years ago, I worked for several months with a woman who, she was kind of on the sensitive side about being able to discern things, but she had some friends who told her that you were always, like you said, you were always reincarnated with the same people, although in different positions.
Parameters.
A mother, yeah, a mother once, a child again, uncle, father, whatever.
Yeah, I like to say there are I don't really believe in soulmates. I believe in soul families because there are two, and in the preamble for the Hollow Curse, I say there. Give me 1 second, I'll get it right. Oh, where are you? Where are you? Ah, there you are. There are two forces that are stronger than death: love and hate. They draw us together in life after life, forming families of souls traveling through time together. Of these two, love is the stronger and more persistent. Like gravity, its force stretches between the stars and across all time. Because of this, no parting in love will ever last, no sorrow eternal. Love makes a lie of all obstacles. Age, race, gender, caste, or station are as nothing before its subtle might. Even hate, its strongest foe, must fall before the pervasive force of love. Thus, love binds us to love, and eternity becomes a friendly place we journey through with those our hearts hold dear. I like that sentiment, and I wrote it, and I honestly believe it. But yeah, it gets into this thing of, yeah, families of souls growing together, and they're families of choice. You know, we make a great deal of blood, but I think that the families we make by choice are far more important than the ones we make by blood. And I think those stretch across time. It's the romantic in me.
One thing I've never really heard much in reference to reincarnation is mental illness, because for the most part, mental illnesses are not the fault of the people who have them, no matter how much crap that they do themselves. So how could karma be assigned to them, to their
Well, karma can be really nasty. It can be very positive too. It's a comeuppance. Now, I'm not one to say that all mental illness is going to be the result of something reincarnation. A lot of it is chemical imbalance. You are incarnated. A lot of it is upbringing. Now, that can be reincarnation in so much as if you are going to get a comeuppance for the things that you did, you'll be steered into a family that'll give you that comeuppance. Then again, some people just get steered into families where the parents are completely nutsy faggot. So the only answer I can say to my personal opinion, and you know, that's all this is that sometimes mental illness is coming from past life experiences. Other times it's coming from chemical imbalance. I even believe in various forms of possession. that a small percentage could be coming from that, because I'm not going to draw a circle around one discipline and say, no, this is absolutely right. And I was a psych major. So I have a great deal of respect for a lot of the discipline of psychology. But I also think that when it tries to cut itself away from faith and structures of faith, it's ignoring part of the human condition, which is a bit of a mistake. Then again, I'd hate to see it go back to the thing of, oh, it's psychotic. No, we don't give him lithium. We exercise him and torture him until he's behaving properly. But I no more want to see them go back to frontal lobotomies as a routine treatment for eccentrics. So lots of things. Yeah, mental health is challenging.
Lobotomy, fortunately, was a fairly short-lived practice, probably
Yeah.
less than 50 years, really, that it was used.
Yeah, well, less than 50 years from the time that they found that it was completely ineffective. From the time that you would likely survive one, to the time they found it completely ineffective. But there's a lot of mysticism comes from. Well, I have a sister who believes that all religion came because of magic mushrooms and Paiute and other such things. And there's some fascinating books by Carlos Castaneda that details the use of traditional hallucinogens in Mesoamerican shamanic practices. He basically went out and got high with a whole bunch of shamans and recorded the events. So it's interesting stuff. But for the purposes of fiction, I think when it comes to this, I'm going to keep an open mind, and I'm not going to use the hallucinogens myself because I have enough trouble coping without them. Especially third day of a con, one of which I didn't sleep. So, okay, well, thank you very much for your attendance. I hope it was of some interest, and my links are in the chat. My website is www.stephenpearl.com, and you can read the first chapter of any of my work for free and get breakdowns on everything that I've done. And again, thanks. And I'm going to close it down now because there's a reading coming up and I need to change the login. It's Dale McLennan, if that name rings a bell.
It doesn't.
Okay. Well, pleasure meeting you. Have a good one.
That's a meeting you several times, actually.
Yeah.